All right, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to We Read the Documents live stream. Your host, John Brisson. Today with me, I have esteemed researcher and dear friend Weezy from the What Is Truth podcast. Brother, glad we finally got you on here to discuss some Lincoln. How you doing?
Doing exquisite. I've got my Confederate flag on. I've got my Lincoln shirt. I'm ready to represent and have a rather fascinating Lincoln show with takes that I'm sure no one has heard.
Yes, that's why.
Unless you've been following me.
That's why I'm glad that you have been carrying David McGowan's work into researching the Lincoln assassination. And on top of that, you've gone further than Dave McGowan did. Now, obviously, Dave McGowan did die of cancer, tragically and sadly. So his discussing of Lincoln was somewhat cut short of updates or following through. But that being said, though, however, you have continued the ball with the Lincoln research, and for that, gumshoe journalism, actually, interviewing historians and everything like that. My hat's off to you. That's a dying art of journalism, and there's only a few of us out there that are really actually trying to interview sources, trying to track down original documentation, which is quite difficult. We're talking about the 1800s with Abraham Lincoln, but I am glad that you are carrying that tradition alive, Weezy. It's important.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I always try to give David McGowan his props. He is my inspiration. He's the one that inspired me to go down this rabbit hole to begin with. And I have tried my best to try to carry that torch forward, but I always try to give him props. I would not have made these connections without his work, and that's the bottom line. So always try to make sure I give him his props.
So, what is the conventional narrative when it comes to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln? Would you briefly go over that real quick? I know most of my audience was probably indoctrinated with that during learning U.S. history in school, usually in middle school and sometimes continued on in high school. And then, of course, if you got a degree in history in college, we further that as well. But what's the generalized conventional narrative that's out there about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah, so it's a very fascinating one, and I think we don't get taught the entire conventional story because it falls apart upon a little bit of scrutiny. Generally speaking, most people think that the whole deal just involved Wilkes Booth hating Lincoln so much that he entered a crowded theater, put a bullet to his head, jumped down from the presidential box, yelled "Sic Semper Tyrannis," the South is avenged. Lincoln is pronounced dead the next day at 7:22 a.m. That is pretty much the generalized Cliff's Notes version of what most people think happened. In reality, the official story is far more fascinating, far more interesting, and as I previously mentioned, I believe it doesn't get taught anymore because it falls apart. It's way too fantastical. But we are told through the official narratives that John Wilkes Booth had originally planned to kidnap Lincoln. So it is, through the official channels, it is indeed labeled a conspiracy. The issue is, I believe the conspiracy went far, far deeper than the official story leads us to believe. But about a year prior to the actual assassination, we are told Booth started rounding up co-conspirators. So it wasn't just a one-man show. There were other co-conspirators involved. And the original plot involved kidnapping Lincoln. And the plan was to kidnap Lincoln so that they could then take him further south and then arrange for a prisoner swap, if you will. The South had a hard time. Their biggest handicap was manpower in the South. They had great generals, they had great strategy, but their manpower was nowhere near.
And their economy was also very shot as well too, because they had only cotton backing up their currency, and the UK had started getting their cotton from India at the time, which greatly hindered their economy.
Right. Yeah. So putting all these factors and putting them in your head. This is why. Well, this is what the official narrative tells us as to why Booth was planning this conspiracy, was to kidnap him and then arrange a prisoner swap. I mean, you kidnap the president of the North, you will be able to demand a hefty amount of prisoners in exchange.
Yeah.
So that was the plan. As the months neared the actual assassination date, which happened on April 14th of 1865, as the months waned on, this was planned a year prior. As it got closer, a lot of the co-conspirators started backing off. They said, this is unrealistic. How in the world are we going to kidnap the president of the North, the United States? It's unrealistic. So many of them ended up backing off, and some of them were still hung nonetheless. So just, it's really messed up. I feel all of the co-conspirators were indeed patsies. So the fact that 7 ended up getting hung is a tragedy as well. But so the Civil War ended with the surrender of Lee at Appomattox on April the 9th. And so, as you can imagine, D.C. was in huge celebrations. At this point in time, most of the co-conspirators of John Wilkes Booth had abandoned him. He only had 2 more, or a couple of, 3 trusty co-conspirators that ventured on. Mm-hmm. So now it went from, we are told, this is the official narrative, that Booth was going to arrange for the assassination of Lincoln and Secretary of State War William Seward. Also, Ulysses S. Grant was on the hit list. Also, Vice President Johnson. The plan was to do simultaneous attacks, kind of like on 9/11. Simultaneous attacks to cause mass pandemonium. Wilkes Booth, we are told through the official narrative, came up with this elaborate plan that Friday morning of April 14th. So it's not like he had weeks, he had months to prepare for this.
Yeah.
It was on Friday. This is one of the very first red flags. Wait a minute. He planned this elaborate getaway and escape that Friday and pulled it off and got away for 12 days. He was on the run. But this is the part where a lot of people don't even realize that there were more alleged assassination attempts on other figures. It wasn't just Lincoln through the official narratives. So we are told that President Lincoln was going to be attending a play, Our American Cousin, a British play, or it's a comedy type of play, really. And the plan was to pull the trigger at 10:15 during the most chaotic part of the play, where everyone was roaring and laughter to try to cover the gunshot. At 10:15, one of the co-conspirators was assigned to kill Secretary of State Seward at the Seward Mansion, which was located right there, right next door to the White House. This is a key part to why I think the whole thing was a sham and never actually took place. The Seward Mansion attack is a key component to the Lincoln assassination that never gets mentioned, never gets talked about. And when it gets talked about, people talk about it as historical fact. Even historians that have conspiratorial leanings, even the ones that will say, oh yeah, I believe Wilkes Booth never got shot at Garrett's barn and whatnot, they'll even accept that the Seward Mansion attack took place.
Yeah.
David McGowan said, no, it did not take place. And he gives his reasons, and I have expanded on those reasons as to why I don't believe it took place. Another co-conspirator at that same time of 10 o'clock was supposed to assassinate Vice President Johnson, who was staying at a hotel near Ford's Theater. And the only one that got assassinated was Lincoln that day. The attack on the Seward mansion left many bloodied, many people allegedly beat up by one individual who did not have scratches or any bruises, but this guy beat up everyone but did not kill his target. The gentleman that was supposed to kill Vice President Johnson opted to get drunk instead. That, in a nutshell, very quick nutshell, because I can go on for hours on this subject, is the official story. So it was indeed a conspiracy to allegedly disrupt DC and cause mass chaos and hopefully disrupt, what had, kind of restart is what we're told. Why Wilkes Booth? This was Wilkes Booth. His hate. How many times do we hear that? It's always hate, the biggest driver in a lot of these events that are questionable. So yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah. So, what happened to John Wilkes Booth in the conventional narrative after the assassination?
Well, we are told that he jumps down. So I have many questions. This is where I've taken it a little bit deeper. I mean, with all these events, I'm of the mindset that we will never know 100% definitively about anything. I wasn't there. This was 160 years ago, so I don't claim to know that. But if I was a betting individual, and if someone said, who do you think killed Lincoln? Most everyone's going to say John Wilkes Booth. I would put my money that it was one of the occupants in the presidential box, Major Henry Rathbone. That even our good friend Don Jeffries has like, whoa, you're the first Henry Rathbone conspiracy theorist. And anyone that has followed the Lincoln assassination, that's probably, whoa, your mind has just exploded. Henry Rathbone, how dare you? And I will lay my case as to why.
Okay.
And it's heavily inspired through David McGowan's work. David McGowan never outright says Henry Rathbone was the trigger man, but I have connected the dots and gone even further. And so what leads me to believe that Henry Rathbone was the trigger man in the presidential box was that in the official story, we are told that it was Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln, stepsister, fiance of Henry Rathbone, Clarice, and Clara Harris, and Major Henry Rathbone. Those were the four occupants in that box at Ford's Theater. The official story tells us that Lincoln was sitting with his left ear closest to the left wall, facing the stage. The official story tells us that at some point, John Wilkes Booth enters the box. He opens the box. No one sees him, apparently. Opens the box. He wedges the door shut. This is the official story. I'm trying to give you the official story so you can process it and see how ridiculous it is. John Wilkes Booth wedges the door shut, apparently found the perfect size plank, just lying around like a cartoon, it's just right there, wedges the door shut. He then pulls out his one-shot Derringer. This is a point in time in history where the revolver exists. But Wilkes Booth, for whatever reason, chose to take a one-shot Derringer. Wilkes Booth was making the equivalent of $300,000 a year as an actor. He had money. He was loaded. So he chose to take a one-shot Derringer. That is super strange. This is the official story. He then gets behind Lincoln, who's seated close to the door, left ear next to the wall. The official story tells us that at some point, Lincoln turns his head slightly this way, which allowed him to get mortally wounded with that one-shot Derringer. He just turned his head at just the wrong moment, unlike other superheroes.
Where Trump turned his head just at the right moment, right?
At the right moment, yes. Yes. This is what the official story tells us. So then, after the shot, according to Major Henry Rathbone, who was seated right there in that box, John Wilkes Booth says, "Freedom! This is according to his deposition.
Mhm.
After he yells freedom like a boss, after laying that shot into Lincoln, he then lunges at Henry Rathbone with his 10-inch Bowie knife. So he was carrying a one-shot Derringer and a Bowie knife. Those were his weapons of choices to enter a crowded theater that should have had a bodyguard outside the doorway guarding it, but miraculously that bodyguard chose to get drunk as well. Just like the Epstein guards falling asleep. This is the official story. It was Jonathan Parker was supposed to be seated on the seat outside the aisle leading up into the box. Interestingly enough, John F. Parker, the security guard that should have been guarding, was chosen, handpicked by Mary Todd Lincoln. And this isn't conjecture. In Otto Eisenschimmel's book, epic book that came out in 1937, Otto Eisenschimmel shows the copy of the White House stationery of Mary Todd Lincoln asking for John F. Parker. Why is this important? John F. Parker, who the heck is John F. Parker? John F. Parker was the most demerited cop in the police force. So out of all the cops in the DC
you get the
area,
worst. You get the worst.
You get the worst? I'm trying to lay my case why Henry Rathbone is the trigger man. And I'm hoping I'm connecting. I'm laying some reasonable doubt as to the official story.
You are.
The official story tells us after he grapples with Henry Rathbone, he slashes at Henry Rathbone, leaving him a gash between the shoulder and the elbow. After Mary Todd Lincoln and Clara Harris still don't scream. This is the official story. John Wilkes Booth then allegedly climbs up on top of the box, jumps down onto the theater. Most people will say that's when he broke his leg. Some people say he broke his leg later on. This is important because even one of these major aspects to the official story, there isn't consensus.
Yeah.
It's not a consensus whether he broke his leg or not. He breaks his leg. He then yells, "Sic Semper Tyrannis, the South is avenged." According to most witnesses, some witnesses didn't hear him say anything. A lot of witnesses couldn't even identify Booth then. It was only until much later. I'll get into that later. So Wilkes Booth then runs out the back, gets on a horse, hauls behind, makes his way to the Navy Yard Bridge, which should have been under lockdown. The guard Silas Cobb was under strict orders not to allow anyone across it. There was a curfew. Even though the war was already over, this is what official historian apologists will say, well, the war was over, so you can forgive Silas Cobb for allowing Booth to get through the Navy Yard Bridge. And the Silas Cobb allows Wilkes Booth to get on that bridge and escape, as well as Davy Harold, another accomplice, to escape. So he lets two guys when the bridge should have been under lockdown. That is another weird aspect. Why was he allowed to leave? Also, after the news that Lincoln had been shot and they were trying to look for Wilkes Booth, they sent troops to the north. They sent troops to the east. But it wasn't until much, much later that they ended up sending troops to the Navy Yard Bridge, the more likely escape route.
Actual direction.
That was the most the actual direction, yeah. So you can see that many things were afoot. And this is what I mean. This is why you don't get taught the official story. There's too many holes into it. But let's go back to the presidential box.
Okay.
I think you asked me what happened after the assassination. Wilkes Booth, that's how he started his escape route. He was then on the run for 12 days until he was cornered at Garrett's barn 12 days later. But if we go back to the presidential box, where Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris and Mary Todd Lincoln were at, Mary Todd Lincoln and Clara Harris did not make any yells or any screams until after. We are told till after John Wilkes Booth said, "The South is avenged," and leaves the stage. So all these events take place, the grappling, the shot, the jumping down, the theatrics of "the South is avenged," the whole theatrical display. And it's not until he leaves the stage that Mary Todd decides to scream. And Clara Harris never even yelled at all. Her husband had just taken a gash. She's not screaming? That doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make sense why Mary Todd Lincoln chose this particular John F. Parker guy, the most demerited cop in the thing. Now let's get funkier. Major Henry Rathbone, who was this guy? He was actually not the first pick that Lincoln chose for his guest to be in that box. His first top pick was Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant had been announced several days prior to the Lincolns showing up at Ford's Theater as the main attraction. See, everyone knew Lincoln at D.C. Ulysses S. Grant was from further up north.
Yeah.
So he was kind of like the special guest. So they were putting ads out. Ulysses S. Grant will be at Ford's Theater. You can go to Ford's Theater and see the announcement right there of Ulysses S. Grant. He was the main attraction because people were already, like I said, they were already accustomed to Lincoln. So Ulysses S. Grant decides to cancel a couple of hours before the play started. Kind of, in my opinion, kind of like lucky old Larry Silverstein.
Yeah.
Deciding, you know what, I'm going to get a haircut instead. I'm not showing up. Ulysses S. Grant a couple hours like, yeah, man, I know I was supposed to be there. I know you want me to be there, Lincoln, but sorry, bro. I got to take the midnight train. This is the official narrative. Ulysses S. Grant says, I'm taking the midnight train out of Dodge. A lot of other historians, even the ones that believe the official narrative, have scratched their heads as to why Ulysses S. Grant would want to catch the midnight train. When you look at the train routes, if he would have waited to catch the 6 a.m. train the next day, his excuse was he wanted to be with his kids up in the Buffalo area on Saturday. But if he would have taken the 6 a.m. train, he would have been there only like 4 hours later than the expected time from midnight, a couple hours.
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge difference. So why would Ulysses S. Grant, this decorated war hero, snub Lincoln only a couple of hours prior? And the official historians will say, oh, it's because Ulysses S. Grant's wife did not get along with Mary Todd. She was a pain in the butt, blah, blah, blah. That's the official narrative. So then the second choice that was to be picked was Assistant Secretary of War Thomas Eckert. Thomas Eckert was a large man, 6'4", presumably well armed, big dude. I mean, Wilkes Booth was 5'7", 5'8". Thomas Eckert, 6'4", big, gigantic man of a man, almost as big as Lincoln, pretty much. Thomas Eckert said, sorry, Edwin Stanton has things for me to do. I'm busy. You know what Thomas Eckert's job was as Secretary of War? He was in charge of the telegraph lines. Crazily enough, after the assassination, the telegraph lines go down. So Thomas Eckert says, I can't be there because I'm busy, and the telegraph lines go down? I hope I'm laying some reasonable doubt.
Yes, you are.
So let's get into Major Henry Rathbone. Now he's the third string. First string was Ulysses S. Grant. So sorry, bro, I can't do it. Second string, Thomas Eckert, Assistant Secretary of War under Edwin Stanton. Sorry, bro, can't do it. I'm busy. Telegraph lines go down anyways. So third string is Major Henry Rathbone.
And this is the President of the United States that you're going to see a play with, right? It's not just like, someone. It is the president of the United States of America. So it's weird for, like you said, for two people to blow him off directly like that. And I guess real quick, some people could argue maybe with Mary Todd Lincoln and Henry Rathbone's wife, shock could have played a role in why they did not scream after they heard the gunshot, right? Which can happen. I'm not going to sit here and say that that is not a plausible explanation. However, I will say in many cases, people that view certain events get things wrong in memory quite often. However, for so many people to not really go with the conventional narrative, which even though it's a crowded theater, I am aware of that, and they're doing a play, but if you hear a gunshot, which would be quite loud, and then you hear a guy, jumping down, yelling "Sic Semper Tyrannis," you would think there'd be some sort of panic in the theater. You think that there'd be some sort of generalized reaction of many people seeing such event occurred, since John Wilkes Booth wanted so many people to see him, right? But that wasn't the case. So since that isn't the case, it does still play strong, as you're mentioning, reasonable doubt, even if you could wave off Mary Todd Lincoln for shock. You're still building a very strong case of other reasonable doubt inconsistencies with the entire narrative that is given to us.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I'm glad you're pointing out these other issues, like how these things could be explained. Because I always want to steel man my position. And that's why I'm laying out all these other things, because one coincidence, all right, it could happen. Two coincidences, well, but when I'm starting, I'm trying to lay my case thick on you.
The worst cop. The worst cop. Now, Mary Todd Lincoln, do you know that she knew the officer personally? Like, her family had a relationship with the officer, or was there any blood relation between the two, and that's why?
There have been theories by Lincoln assassination researchers, even the ones that accept the official story mostly or completely. They've asked the questions, why was it? Was John F. Parker a blood relative? Was he having relations with Mary Todd Lincoln? Because I want to get into that at some point as well. There are rumors that Abraham Lincoln was probably gay. And some people get upset at that. I don't say that for any agenda or nothing, but it would fit in with my theory as to why Mary Todd Lincoln really didn't react. Because I think when people think about relationships, especially in that time period, they think everyone's committed and loyal. They had the same issues that we have today, man.
Okay.
There was cheating, there was adultery, and all these things going on. So if the Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln relationship was more like a Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton, it would kind of make more sense. But see, some people get upset of even anyone mentioning it. Now, the rumors for Lincoln, I haven't been able to concretely state beyond any doubt that Lincoln was indeed gay. There's a lot of pretty good circumstantial evidence. So one of those pieces is his relationship with Joshua Fry Speed, his best friend. They would sleep in the same bed a lot. And there's even the story that prior to, so when Lincoln was engaged with Mary Todd, they were supposed to be getting married at a certain date. They had a date set out and everything. When Joshua Fry Speed moved a distance away, he postponed his wedding date because he was depressed. Now, that's not evidence. I'm completely aware of it, but, there's some pretty decent circumstantial evidence. And then that would also explain away why Mary Todd Lincoln acted bizarrely the day of April 14th.
As an aside, you could say the same thing about JFK and his his homosexual relationship with his good friend Lynn Billings, right? And then also JFK, the narrative of him being a playboy, him being an adulterer, was that to cover up for his homosexuality? And if so, you also have Jackie Onassis Kennedy acting quite odd after the assassination of JFK, if we're talking about the mirroring of history, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's many, many similarities to the Kennedy assassination. One of the big ones that I like to mention quite a bit is how Lincoln was killed at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was killed in a Ford Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah.
They also both had Vice President Johnsons. Another crazy similarity. A lot of their political achievements were exactly 100 years apart. So there's so many crazy things. But I want to go back to Major Henry
Yes, of
Rathbone
course.
because I don't want to get too sidetracked because I think it's a big one. It's one of the ones that definitely sets me apart from any Lincoln researcher out there. One of the interesting things that McGowan pointed out was how out of the occupants in the presidential box, out of all of them, only Henry Rathbone ever gave a deposition in court. Mary Todd Lincoln didn't give one. Neither did Clara Harris. That's weird. One would have thought that maybe Mary Todd Lincoln would have wanted to put her voice out in the record, or even Clara Harris, but it's only Henry Rathbone.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Rathbone. This is the one that melts brains right here, and this is all credit to David McGowan. Henry Rathbone gave 3 depositions. His first deposition was given in the third person. Second and third depositions in the first person. This is the one that's going to melt people's brains. All depositions were verbatim, signifying that he was repeating a memorized script.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you would give your, if you were lived it, it would be first person always initially. And then how could a third person narrative, which is hearsay because you didn't witness yourself, right? How could that go with a first person narrative of an eyewitness of account of yourself that you have lived? So they wouldn't add. Yeah, that's logical and incoherent there for sure.
Yeah, I went to when I went to DC a couple of months ago for the 160th anniversary. There was a ranger there at Ford's Theater when I was in line to get in there, and we were talking. He was kind of mocking me for being a conspiracy theorist on the Lincoln assassination, and then he's like, "Man, at least come up with some original stuff." And then I dropped him that. I'm like, "Don't you find it weird that Henry Rathbone said his deposition in exactly the same way in no less than 3 occasions? Don't you find it weird?" He's like, yeah, that is very strange. And then he walked away. He went from laughing at me, mocking me, to not wanting to discuss the issue anymore.
Nah, don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Shut it down.
Yeah, it was starting to hurt his brain. So that's a major part as to why Henry Rathbone is a suspect. Let me give you the nail in the coffin as to why I am a Henry Rathbone conspiracy theorist. So a few years after the assassination, Henry Rathbone, with his now wife, sister, or stepsister wife, Clara Harris, they moved to Germany. A few years after the assassination, they moved to Germany, and it is in Germany that he ends up stabbing himself. He then shoots and stabs his stepsister wife, Clara Harris, killing her. When the authorities show up, he says an attacker did that to him. And the authorities in Germany said, no, there was no attacker. You did it. They threw him in the loony bin. So now we have a precedent that this guy is capable of self-inflicted knife wounds, and murder.
Okay, yeah.
So
Yeah. You're building a pretty strong case of reasonable doubt, that's for sure. Um,
well, official historians, the ones that will actually talk about that later part of Major Rathbone will say, well, he had PTSD. He saw the, that's their explanation for it. My rebuttal to that is Major Henry Rathbone was a major in the Civil War, the bloodiest. He saw tons of stuff. So you're gonna tell me it was the Lincoln stuff that finally
yeah.
made him crazy? So I dismiss it as that. So yeah, I mean that's my case, and if you want, we can definitely get into the Seward Mansion attack as well.
Yeah, very much so. So, I guess a question I have is, I guess we could ask after we talk about the Sword Mansion hoax. Is why do you think Lincoln was the assassination occurred? Why do you think it happened? Why do you think, there have been people who have talked about the Jesuit connections to Abraham Lincoln's assassination, for example. But then again, the so-called letters where Abraham Lincoln is calling out the Jesuits is supposedly allegedly a forgery, right? So who do you think was the cause of the Lincoln assassination, and why?
Well, people that ascribe to the official narrative will try to put blame on the South, that it was a Southern plot to eliminate Lincoln, but that doesn't hold a lot of water. There's no basis. There's no evidence for it. The South already knew things were winding down. They wanted to surrender months before the actual surrender date, so they were in talks of it. The war was already over, so now you're gonna kill Lincoln after the war is over? They wanted it over, so it holds no water. The Confederate president, shoot, what's his name? He even he was put under trial, and he was, he was found not guilty. There's not much evidence. I tend to think that things were very similar to today, where both sides probably were involved in, maybe not at the lower ranks, maybe not even at the general ranks or anything like that, but higher up. They
Jefferson Davis was a Confederate president, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to wait till you finish your train of thought, but Spirit Man Live said it in the chat. Shout out to Spirit Man. But yes, Jefferson Davis was a Confederate president.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the general idea as to why Lincoln was taken out, that makes more sense, is that Lincoln was trying to bring the war to an end. Like I said, way before it actually ended, he was already working on it. He was making promises to the South that things were going to be smooth. They weren't going to be harsh. They weren't going to be taking retribution on the South. And a lot of the Northerners, especially the businessmen, were like, "Nah, man, we want to milk this cow. We want some hardcore reparations." Mm-hmm. So by leaving Lincoln in office, this is what some people say, and it makes sense to me, that's why they had to get rid of Lincoln. They had to X him out. He was going to complicate things, with the transition after the war. Now, I tend to think that definitely could have played a role. There could also have been a ritualistic type of deal. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was shot on a Good Friday. Lincoln at that time, prior to the assassination, he was hated. And not just by the South, he was hated by his own party. He wasn't a very well respected. Under Lincoln, habeas corpus was suspended, something mm-hmm. Trump is now thinking about reviving, another mm-hmm. Lincoln connection. As I've gone down this, I see that Trump has some weird fascination with Lincoln.
Yeah.
But that's one of those other similarities. But Lincoln was a tyrant. We now, through the official channels, we get told that Lincoln was a Christ-like figure, a good guy, just an honest Abe is what we're told, who was taken down by Wilkes Booth's hate. But the reality of the situation, a lot of people didn't like Lincoln. He had many enemies. And so by him getting taken out on a Good Friday, it very well could have been a ritualistic assassination. Another interesting thing, when I went to Ford's Theater a couple months back, I noticed that the stage at Ford's Theater had the Masonic tiling, the black and white checkerboard. So right there, next to Ford's Theater, is the Masonic Temple. So I tend to think that it was a combination of things. I'm not going to say it was certainly one thing or the other. I think it was a combination of things. And those two that I gave you seem to make the most sense in my mind anyways.
But Lincoln was, like you'd mentioned, more of trying to bring back the Union and South still had to be penalized, but far less than the radical Republicans wanted. Right. And so,
which is what they got after his death. The Reconstruction period was brutal for the South.
Yes. And I think if I remember in history, right, his quote was "malice towards none," right, was his quote. And so, that could have definitely been a reason for his assassination. You're mentioning a Freemasonic ritual aspect about it. I can't rule that out. There's also various Jesuit connections, as other people, Spearman Lins mentioned American Jesuits by Chris Pinto, documentary, and there was a book that someone mentioned earlier, Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Thomas M. Harris. So, there are kind of Roman implications as well within the plot. I would say just like JFK, you had various people, and was that a ritual? That's a whole nother discussion too, right? It's very similar. So,
yeah, the Catholic connection and Masonic connection is deep in the Lincoln stuff. Our good friend Twisted recently brought up to my attention how the Masons and Catholics were in huge battles in Mexico.
Yeah.
Around this time. And when you look at the Lincoln assassination, many of the co-conspirators were Catholics. The second in command, there's so much to it, man. But the second behind John Wilkes Booth as the leading co-conspirator was Mary Surratt's son, John Surratt Jr. John Surratt Jr., this is one of those pieces of the story that I'm still trying to dig in, man. It's hard to find any information on him. But John Surratt Jr., the whole Surratt family, they were Catholic. John Surratt Jr. was in New York during the assassination. When he saw the newspapers write about the assassination, he quickly got on a train and went to Canada. From Canada, he went over to Liverpool, England. From Liverpool, England, he made it down to Rome, where he became a papal bodyguard. And coincidentally, someone in the Vatican recognized John Surratt Jr. from Maryland. Like, what are the odds two Marylanders are going to be in Rome at this time period? But it happened. Once word was out that he was in Rome, the Vatican offered to give up John Surratt Jr. And the government said, we're all right. We're all right. He then goes to Alexandria, Egypt, John Surratt Jr. He's then caught and sent back, and even on the way back, it just took weeks and weeks and weeks. They were delaying it. This is an interesting part of it. First of all, who was financing John Surratt Jr. on all these
trips around the world,
endeavors, bro?
Yeah.
It costs a lot of money in 2025 to do the things he was doing. He was doing it back in 1865, and he becomes a papal bodyguard. Like, that's super weird. That I feel needs to be explored more. But then the interesting thing is, a lot of the lesser co-conspirators, including his mother, Mary Surratt Jr., who was the first female hung by the United States government, they were hung because they were given military tribunals. When John Surratt Jr. gets returned from Alexandria, Egypt to face court, he's given a civil trial. And guess what happens to John Surratt Jr. in civil trial?
What?
He is acquitted 8-4. The second in command in the Lincoln conspiracy, second in command is acquitted? What does that tell you about the lesser co-conspirators? Poor SOBs were killed unjustly. They were patsies, man. I mean, the whole story is a sham, but the fact that these guys were hung, it's sad, because you'll hear people talk about, oh, Mary Surratt, she deserved to die because she knew about it. She knew about, she may have known about a possible kidnapping plot, but like I told you at the very beginning, the plot to actually kill Lincoln was not hatched until that Friday morning. So if anything, these people that were hung should have been tried for the kidnapping plot, not a murder plot. And you'll hear official historians say, yeah, I'm glad they killed Mary Surratt, and I think they're despicable human beings. Why would you ever wish the death upon any human being to begin with, but you're celebrating someone that very possibly could have been completely innocent, to be honest, you know? And like I stated, her son was the second in command of the conspiracy, and he was acquitted given in a civil trial. And this is where they brought up Henry Rathbone's third deposition during that trial, and it was memorized again, you know, verbatim. So yeah, that's one of those Catholic connections for sure that are heavy with the Lincoln assassination.
And we can use that to pivot into the Mary Surratt boarding house kidnapping plot, right?
Yeah. So the boarding house was just a couple of blocks, not very. That was one of the awesome things that I got to do when I was in DC a couple of months ago. I didn't realize how close everything was, man. And because parking is a pain in the behind.
Oh, I hate it. It's horrible in DC. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. We ended up walking to a lot of these places. But the Mary Surratt boarding house in 2025 is now a Chinese restaurant, oddly enough. And you could only, because it's in Chinatown, it's in the Chinatown district of DC. And the only way you know it's there is I looked up the address and whatever, and then you get to the building and there's just a little plaque that says the Mary Surratt boarding house just right there, just outside of the awesome aromas that Chinese food has to offer, of course. But it's pretty trippy how something historic, something legendary is now just, you can make a Chinese restaurant. I would have thought, let's take more reverence towards this. Let's preserve it. But it kind of makes sense because this kind of segues into the Seward Mansion attack. Unlike the Mary Surratt boarding house, the Seward Mansion no longer exists. It was taken down, I think in the 1920s, 1930s, it was taken down, and it is now a federal building. And it is right there on Lafayette Square. So the White House is right there on Lafayette Square, and you could walk to the White House from the old Seward Mansion. It's like a 3-minute walk, 2-minute walk. It's right there in Lafayette Park. No longer exists. There's a tiny little plaque inside this federal building, and I tried to go in there. I wanted to take a picture of the plaque, but you need to have like a special invite and blah blah blah. Man, I just want to see the damn plaque where this house used to exist. Seward Mansion, this is important. I had no idea where the Seward Mansion, I had read about it. I had been doing research. Once I realized that the Seward Mansion is right there in front of the damn White House, I'm like, man, this never took place at all. This attack. Right there should have been, during this epic attack, this Rambo-ish attack. If you can pull up Lewis Payne Powell, please. Okay. Lewis Payne Powell was a young 20-year-old, good-looking chap. I've made funny memes with cutting out Louis Payne Powell, and I put Calvin Klein insignia. Good looking, handsome guy. He was said to be 6 foot tall and super athletic and rugged dude. Yeah, you'll be able to find some colorized pictures of him.
There we go.
Yes, sir. Look at that colorized one right there. Boom, that's my favorite one. Okay, let's pull that up. And if you can make it larger, if possible. If not, we may be able to. So I want you to look at Louis. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, there were several attacks to take place. And, yeah, you might not be able to. That's maybe as big as we will be able to get it. So that's fine. So obviously one of those attacks was on Lincoln himself. The other was on the Seward mansion. Secretary of State William Seward obviously was at the Seward mansion. And this guy, Louis Payne Powell, Louis Thornton Powell, Mosby, he had so many aliases, this kid. Look at him. When you see this picture, how would you describe it?
I mean, he's kind of wiry looking, you know. He's not definitely.
He's a big dude.
Yes, he is, but yeah. You're right.
He's pretty well built, and I'm saying this because a lot of the official
tall
historians, a lot of the official historians will say this is when they talk about the Seward Mansion attack. This is how they put conviction into it. This guy overpowered everyone in the house. He beat up, depending on whose version of events, he beat up anywhere between 5 and 6 people in that mansion. Do you see any scratches?
No, I don't see a black eye, nothing broken,
eyes,
nothing, not at all.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is what David McGowan points out. You don't see any bruising,
nothing,
any scratches.
none of his clothes are torn?
Nothing. So we are told the official story on the mansion. I'll give you the super quick Cliff's Notes, and then I'll tell you why I think this was a completely manufactured affair. So we are told Louis Payne Powell goes to the Seward mansion. Secretary of State Seward conveniently, luckily, miraculously, whatever term you want to use, he had got into a carriage accident a week prior. Here's my gumshoe research that takes. This is what McGowan said. He said the mansion attack never took place. I have since found out, and this is where I expand on McGowan's work.
Weezy, you there?
Seward.
Sorry, you broke up. You broke up for a minute. You said you expanded on McGowan's work.
Yeah. I expanded on McGowan's work in that I have since found more information. So McGowan said that he finds it incredibly hard to believe that anything happened at the Seward mansion. I have since found more information just proving his point. So when the mansion attack happened, allegedly, Seward was in the 3rd floor in a comatose state, almost like a vegetable. He had suffered a carriage accident a week prior to this attempt on his life. I have found out that Seward, in meeting with Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and Thomas Eckert, he went to meet up with them to tell him that he had contacts in Europe that had told him that there were assassins out to kill William Seward. They wanted to kill him because they felt he was the one blocking the negotiations between Lincoln and the South. See, this kind of lends more credence to Lincoln was trying to be cool with the South. It was Seward and his associate. He was being blamed as one of these guys. He was trying to make it hard. He was trying to make it hard. So the assassins in Europe wanted to take Seward out. When Seward got wind of this, he quickly ran to the War Department with Edwin Stanton and Thomas Eckert and said, dude, they're trying to kill me. He was freaking out, not because of Lincoln. He was freaking out for himself. We are told that after that meeting, on his way back home, he gets into a carriage accident, which puts him in. This is the information that McGowan doesn't talk about. This is what I mean I've expanded upon. So he gets into a carriage accident. He is now in a comatose state. He's a vegetable for all intents and purposes, laying on the third room of this 3-story, 30-room mansion. He's in the third story. Because he had a carriage accident, his jaw was wired shut. Okay, this is important to the official story. When Lewis Payne Powell visits Secretary of State Seward, he has a little box, we are told, a little medicine box, and he tells, when he knocks on the door, houseboy servant William Bell answers the door, and Lewis Payne Powell says, I got some medicine I need to give to Mr. Seward. Houseboy says, dude, he's sick. He can't take any medicine. They allegedly start arguing for a few minutes, we're told, 5 minutes. And at some point, Lewis Payne Powell just pushes right through house servant Bell, pushes right through him. As he's making his way up, beelining to the third story, that should raise a question. How did he know to go directly to the third story?
Exactly where he was.
Yeah, how did he know this? This is something official historians have never even tried to answer. So as he's making his way up around the second landing, he encounters one of the Seward sons, Frederick Seward. And they were all ex-military dudes, military-age dudes. They weren't kids. He meets up to Fred. Fred's like, what are you doing? He's like, I got to give Mr. Seward this medicine. They argue. This is how pathetic the official story is. They argue. At some point, Lewis Payne Powell only showed up with a gun. That's all he had. He puts the gun to Frederick's head, pulls the trigger, and miraculously it misfires. This is the official story. Fires the gun, misfires. Oh crap, doesn't work. Raises it up, lands a crushing blow to Frederick's skull, shattering his skull, in which gray matter popped out, apparently. And he lays unconscious on the ground. He then goes over the body and goes directly to Secretary of State Seward's room, opens the door. In that room is a nurse, an army nurse, George Robinson, another war veteran. He grapples with Lewis Payne Powell. They fight him off. Lewis Payne Powell beats the crap out of him. He then jumps on Seward, who was in a vegetative state, and then starts to slash away with his knife at Seward. I've heard official historians talk about this attack and say that Seward, even though he was a vegetable, whenever they say it with a straight face, dude, it's so ridiculous. When Lewis Payne Powell is stabbing at the vegetable in bed, Lewis Payne Powell is like, or Secretary of State William Seward is moving around with yoink, yoink, like a cartoon character. So Lewis Powell's missing. And apparently he starts slashing away at his throat, at his jugular. And because of that neck brace, he survives, man. Miracles, Miracle City. Around this point in time, another one of the Seward sons comes in. This guy was sleeping through it all, but apparently now wakes up, comes in. Lewis Payne Powell beats the crap out of him. Then the nurse, at some point, recovers after getting his butt kicked, tries to get him off of the other son. Lewis Payne Powell then hauls behind down the stairs onto his. Oh, and then he encounters Another armed guard, Emmerich Hansel, beats the crap out of him too, for good measure. William Seward had after he was the guy that opened the door.
Mm-hmm.
He alleged this is why it's important where the house was situated right by the White House. He ran to get help. Couldn't find anyone. He comes back, he sees Lewis Payne Powell get on his horse, and Lewis Payne Powell makes his way to the Mary Surratt boarding house. The problems with the attack on the Seward home are aplenty. I just gave you the official story. The bigger issues with the official story is that the depositions from Augustus Seward, the guy that came in at the to fight off Lewis Payne after he was attacking his dad Seward, he gives a deposition.
Mm-hmm.
George Robinson, the nurse, the guy that was taking care of William Seward, that fought with him a couple of times, he gave a deposition. And William Bell, the guy that opened the door, the kid that opened the door. Only 3 depositions in a household of nearly 10 occupants. Fanny Seward was in the home. Frederick Seward, the guy that got the head, the brain matter gushing out, he never gave a deposition. So it's super interesting that only out of all the people in the house, you're only getting 3 depositions. And when you examine all 3 of the depositions, when you compare notes between Augustus Seward's deposition and you compare the notes with George Robinson, the nurse, dude, their depositions do not add up. They can't even recognize each other. They can't even tell who was doing what at what part. One of them, George Robinson, the nurse, says he never heard Lewis Payne Powell say anything. Augustus Seward says that he remembers hearing Lewis Payne Powell saying, "I am mad, I am mad." So this guy's stabbing people and just yelling that he's mad and crazy. Super ridiculous to begin with. But those depositions don't add up. And then when you take into consideration, this is what McGowan points out, the war had just ended. You have to imagine Lafayette Square was probably in party mode, bro. Celebrations everywhere, fireworks every night. Everyone's happy that this brutal battle that had been raging for years, everyone's happy. But we are led to believe that William Bell, the kid that ran out to go fetch help, couldn't find anyone to assist during this attack. McGowan points that out, and that's a damn good question. Wait a minute. So it's party time in D.C. The Seward Mansion is right there by the White House. He couldn't find any soldiers, any security to come and help? That is super sus. Then it starts to make sense in my head why they destroyed the Seward Mansion in the 1930s, because people would have asked questions. Oh, wait, so the attack they would have had to done tours. Being right there, right by White House, just like the Peterson home is still up and around. That's where Lincoln allegedly died. I imagine, this is my conspiracy theory, that they took the house down because none of the attack would have made sense, man. All the stuff that they were saying, and then constantly being reminded that you're right there in Lafayette Square and no one ran to help during this attack. It makes zero sense. And so to add more credence to it, I have since found out that Lewis Payne Powell was framed. When he later makes his way from the Seward Mansion attack down to the Surratt boarding home that is now the Chinese restaurant. Out of all the co-conspirators, the only Southerner in the alleged plot was Lewis Payne Powell. Everyone else was from the Maryland area. So we are told Lewis Payne Powell didn't even know the area, so he just went to the first place that he was somewhat familiar with, and that was the Mary Surratt boarding home. He allegedly walks up at midnight, and the cops are at the Mary Surratt. It's kind of like, remember 9/11? They were already blasting Osama bin Laden's face all over the TV that day of the attack. Well, within hours, they already knew the co-conspirators. They already know who they were looking for. And so they were
Yeah.
already at the Mary Surratt boarding home questioning people. And Lewis Payne Powell, just a big lumbering idiot apparently, just walks up while the feds are investigating the Surratt boarding home. And they ask him, "What are you doing here?" He allegedly had blood on his coat and mud. Allegedly, I'm saying that because I don't believe any of this. And he shows up at, I think, 11 o'clock or midnight, something like that. The feds ask, "Hey, Mary, do you know this guy?" And Mary Surratt denies ever knowing Lewis Payne Powell. And he claims he was out there to dig ditches the next day, and he was just doing surveys of the property at midnight to dig ditches. That's how Lewis Payne Powell allegedly gets caught. What I have found out later on, or recently, I should say, to corroborate more as to why this attack never took place, we found out through official documents. We've read the documents. Like and subscribe to my boy Johnny Brisson. But we have found out that Lewis Payne Powell, they planted. So there was remember the gun that allegedly misfired?
Yeah, that he used as a blunt object later on.
That was left at the crime scene. When he was arrested and, processed as a prisoner, they found another gun in his pocket. And so at some point, they had to get rid of it. You're like, oh, shit. Or, oh, snap.
So why did he pull that gun out if he had that gun to do what he needed to do, right? Because one gun misfired and he had a spare gun in his pocket, right? Like,
yeah. And shout out to Don Thomas. I found out this information through another awesome Lincoln researcher, Don Thomas. It was through his book. He unfortunately believes that the Seward attack happened. But it's funny because he dug up this information that just corroborates McGowan's theory. Because now we have source documenting proof that they framed Lewis Payne Powell. Another interesting thing, this is my own finding, is that after the Seward attack, guess where Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and Thomas Eckert went to? After the assassination.
After the assassination tip? I don't know where.
They went directly to the Seward mansion. Don't you think it would have gone to the Lincoln? Let's go check out on Lincoln.
Yeah.
They went there first. That's super interesting. Now, the first telegraphs talking about the Seward Mansion attack, interestingly, and even the first wanted posters that were printed out, show that John Surratt Jr. was the suspect in the Seward Mansion attack. This is interesting on so many levels because John Surratt Jr. was a petite guy, a little guy. You look at Lewis Payne Powell, that's a more athletic looking guy. It's more believable. That's just. So I think this is not speculation. John Surratt Jr. was the original suspect. I believe that when they found out John Surratt Jr. was nowhere near the area, he was in New York, like, oh, crap. Can't use him as a guy. Who else do we got? Well, there's this big dude, southerner boy. Oh, yeah, that'll work out perfect. This is my line of thinking.
Yes.
Now, interestingly enough, the nurse, George Robinson, immediately after the attack said that the suspect had whiskers and a mustache. John Surratt Jr., if you pull him up, has whiskers and a mustache. Lewis Payne Powell was always clean shaven.
Exactly, yeah.
Clean shaven.
Yeah, you're right.
This is my own finding.
John Surratt, he does have like a little mustache, some whiskers. Yeah.
What I just told you is my own 100% original findings. When you put all this information together, you're like, maybe in their original plan was to frame John Surratt Jr. for the alleged Seward attack. When they find out that he was nowhere near the area, crap, let's pick someone else. And that's when they put in our poor old boy, Lewis Payne Powell. And the attack, in my opinion, never took place. No one was injured. No one was harmed. Official historians will say, well, what about the scars on Secretary of State Seward? Well, You guys have already admitted that he got in a carriage accident. Couldn't that have been caused by this carriage accident as well? You know what I'm saying? That would explain it. Explain that away for any official historians. But yeah, I find it. I find anything about the official story hard to believe and take it. I don't. I don't believe any of it. I do believe that Lincoln was killed, but as far as the official story, I think it's complete horse poo poo.
So, how many books do you believe that you have read on Lincoln now? What are we up to now?
I haven't. I've lost count, but I'm close to 10 at this point,
Pretty good.
which is a good number. I mean, each book few hundred pages long. I think with the amount of data in my head, maybe you were able to tell by all the stuff I've been rambling.
Oh,
about.
yes, very much so.
And I may
Yes.
have lost you.
You didn't lose me. You didn't lose me. You didn't lose me. Yeah, you good job keeping the narratives together. I'm not lost.
And I was trying to describe it in a visual way because some of these, like the Seward Mansion attack, I had to go over it so many times for it to make sense in my head. I had a hard time visualizing it. I'm a very visual person, and I had a hard time visualizing it. So I had to read it so many times until it finally clicked, until I had the official story down pat. And then that's when I was like, used McGowan's critiques of it, and then I just put in my own little findings into it. And so I know you and I, off the air, we've been talking about maybe I should probably get into book format. I'm probably going to take the plunge now, man. I want to do it. I have like a 10-hour audio book or 10-hour book with the amount of information that I have in my head at this moment in time. But and I wouldn't care if it probably wouldn't sell. I realize a lot of people aren't interested in this particular subject, but for me, it's a passion, man.
Yeah.
I love it, and I've gotten super, super deep into this area.
Weezy, is there anything that you want to say in closing about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln? And is there anything that you want to leave the audience with? Because I mean, it's been a deep talk, man. I appreciate it. I've learned a lot. You definitely know your stuff on it. You know, give yourself a pat on the back there, brother, because this is something that you've deeply researched and something that you will continue to research, and it's important, man. And it's important to try to tell what's happening in history. And you know, we might not ever fully know, but the events did occur, right? So we can do our best to try to figure out exactly what happened.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I try to condense a lot of these things into, I got it done in an hour and a half, so it's a record for me. I try to hit all the major aspects of it in that short of time. Normally it takes me, I need a lot more time, so I'm super pleased that we were.
You're going to get more concise because some podcasts are only going to have an hour to get out there and give the story as well too. So
what I've tried to do is just focus on like either just exclusively on the Henry Rathbone or the Seward Mansion. The fact that I was able to hit all three of them is super awesome. If anyone's more wants to hear more of my Lincoln takes, because I go super deep. I just kind of gave a super brief
yes
thing on it. But if you want more details, I've had conversations with the awesome James Perloff and Don Jeffries, and I kind of debated. I wouldn't say debated, but we kind of had some good, healthy, fun back and forths as to why they believe the way they believe and why I believe the way I believe. Nothing ugly at all. It was good to have. I felt, a couple of gentlemen that have immersed themselves in this particular subject have disagreements, and state your case as to why you believe the way you do. Now, if you want more, just go to my Odyssey channel. I made a Lincoln assassination playlist.
I'll put it in the notes.
Go to the playlist.
Put it in the notes.
Yeah. And you can find a lot of my stuff. Thank you, John. It was super awesome to be on your YouTube channel. As you can tell, too, I do, if anyone's interested in my work, I did clean up my act here with John. I am a little more, I'm a little ruffian with my language. But out of respect and love for my buddy John, I cleaned that up today. But I just wanted to put that as a caution because I do go off the rails, and some people, if you are averse to strong language, you may want to stay away from my show. I just want to give a little healthy caution for
disclaimer.
anyone.
I appreciate
Yeah.
the disclaimer, but yes, you and I do agree on many things. We disagree. We have a pretty lengthened discussion. Me being a Christian, you being agnostic, kind of debate back and forth about Christianity, and I appreciate you having me on to. Let me on your platform have such a discussion with you. We've done various shows on Epstein, which I'd love to re-upload on my channel as well too. However, I need to find some way to not have a specific re-upload or re-download of it from Rumble that's 2 to 3 gigabytes long. Trying to
Yeah.
upload that is a nightmare. So I'm gonna have to try to figure out something there. But yes, I definitely recommend everyone who's listening go over and listen to our discussions on Epstein, our discussions on psyop influencers, and etc. And your at work on Abraham Lincoln is in depth and exquisite, if I do say myself, to borrow your term. And it's good, man. Again, like I said, it's good to have more gumshoe journalists out there. I'm glad that you're reading all narrative sources to come to your conclusion. I did the same thing with the finders. I do believe that the finders were generally up to no good and more, but I did read narrative accounts from other people who paint them in a different light. Though I may disagree, I think that the evidence shows otherwise. I am still, still you want to read information from all sources. And I'm glad you did that with Abraham Lincoln as well, too. And you took information from the most conventional narrative historical sources that there is, because that's important, because just because someone might have a conventional narrative or take doesn't mean that they might not have a useful piece of information that someone else might not have when you're investigating, right? So it's important to get information from all sides.
One hundo.
And all right, everybody, well, take care. God bless. Go check out Weezy's channel. I have the links in the show notes. And thank you for coming on, Weezy. I did want to discuss what is going on these past few days. Maybe I can have you back on sooner rather than later. For us just to have a general discussion, brother, of the PSYOP events that are happening. Maybe we can discuss your excellent and exquisite research on the so-called assassination of Donald John Trump. And that might be a very good discussion. But take